Season 10, Episode 9 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading the Thomas Sowell Reader, reading some of the best collected articles from The Economist and political theorist, a bunch of other names, I guess we could call him. Thomas Sowell, this time talking about legal issues. Starting this section, this will be another sort of two-part, breaking up this section into two parts here. Lots of stuff on gun control, on crime, on how we deal with criminals and stuff like that. But you just mentioned you had something you wanted to share once we started recording. What's that?
Well, we have new listeners.
Oh,
I think they're new. There's some of my friends, and really your mother, one of your mother's high school friends. So yeah, of course, they're my friends too. But and they were taking a trip, driving. So they had listened to Season 10, Episode 7. So what are we on now? Are we on 8?
We're on 9 now. So it's 2 episodes ago. So that was in the political issues.
Yeah. So they really liked my. Claimed that they liked our podcast, and
wow.
And that the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington movie was her mom's favorite Jimmy Stewart movie. So I was passing that along to recognize. I mentioned to them because there were a couple listening to it that they doubled our audience. But she requested that I speak about the Blake Lively Justin Baldoni lawsuit.
Oh,
and I wish, in some respect, I wish I could, but I can't because I have no idea who Justin Baldoni is. I am aware that Blake Lively is a celebrity actress.
Yes.
I have nothing. I have no knowledge or information about that lawsuit or how it would be relevant to anybody that anyone cares about, other than her. Maybe if you want to look it up and find out if that could somehow be.
Sure, I'll Google it really quickly. We'll do a brief Google search. And
no, we don't have to do that.
Professional opinions here. Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni, right?
Baldoni, yeah. I don't know who that is. And I think there was because I figured some sort of contractual dispute or something.
Oh, I see. So it's a civil rights complaint and ensuing lawsuit. Lively claimed Baldoni, who was her director and co-star in It Ends With Us, a movie, engaged in inappropriate sexual conduct on the set and orchestrated a smear campaign against her in retaliation for calling out the alleged behavior. So I've never heard of it either.
Sued him for that. Interesting.
Yes, that sounds right. For sexual harassment and retaliation.
That's fascinating because is it like a superstar? Aren't they like an equal footing?
I don't know. That's a good question.
He must be a producer or something.
Oh, he was the director. It says the director of the movie.
Yeah, I understand, but I mean the boss is the producer, wouldn't it be? I mean the producers employ the director and they employ the actors. Is there a chain of command that the director is? I guess it could be a hostile work environment with a coworker. I mean, is a director the supervisor? I guess so, because you're directing.
Yeah, you're directing
but can't the actor or actress just go, just do a bad job on purpose? I mean, can't the actor just do whatever they really want? I mean, you can't make them be good actors.
I guess so.
Do you think?
I don't know. I don't know how that's relevant. It's a sexual assault case.
Was it sexual? Oh, it's an assault. Or
an inappropriate sexual conduct, and then that the director orchestrated a smear campaign against her in retaliation for calling out the alleged behavior. That's the complaint.
Smear campaign.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's our very unprofessional opinion, I guess.
My professional opinion is, no, I don't know what. It's interesting that multimillionaires would sue each other over such a thing. Yeah. I mean, wouldn't the really remedy be don't publicly say don't work with this guy because he'll sexually misconduct you and then defame you? I mean, wouldn't that be really your best? If you're Blake Lively, who's like a superstar, isn't she the one that's married to that annoying guy from Deadpool?
Yes, Reynolds.
Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, Ryan Reynolds. Yeah,
I think he's funny. He's like a billionaire, I think.
Yeah, something like that. He's
made a ton of super effective investments, and has a telephone company or something.
Yeah, I get ads for it all the time. The Mint Mobile. Yeah, all the time I get ads for it.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there should be free reign on rich people. Like free.
Yeah.
It's like open season on rich people. But it's like, I don't know. If you what are your damages?
Yeah.
Oh, I only got 10 movie offers this month instead of 11. I don't know. I guess emotional distress. But how do you compensate emotional distress to somebody that has almost unlimited income?
It's a good question.
Because it's money. Civil lawsuits over money.
Yeah. Interesting.
So how is money going to cure that? Like if you're super wealthy, like I guess you could have punitive damages, so you could punish the person. So maybe that would be it. You just the mere act of making them pay might hurt them, I guess.
Well, maybe I guess we have a request for you to do some research before the next episode, and you can give a more professional statement on this.
Yeah, I'll do that
next time. There you go. You can look into the case.
Yeah, I'm just not. I just don't understand why super wealthy celebrity types who still have. I think she has a very active career. I don't know. Maybe she was blacklisted or something.
Oh, the movie was from 2024, so this is a very recent thing. So
I just saw that CD case at the Walmart today.
Oh, there you go.
And I was thinking, I wonder what that is.
Yeah, I've never heard of the movie.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we should probably start talking about the book here, unless you have any more riveting thoughts on the.
Well, we're on the legal stuff. Do you want to even mention all the goings on in the world with Trump?
Sure. Yes.
And I wish someone as capable as me, not that I'm super capable, but as capable as me, could be given an hour on some major platform to explain all that was wrong with the January 6th prosecutions that justify pardoning every last one of them.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go for an hour, but I can do you mind if I say a couple things?
Sure.
So, it's a big controversy because Trump reportedly just said, F it. We're just pardoning them all. Because I think there was obviously some discussion about.
There was some debate over, some of them were more violent than others and broke windows and stuff. Maybe should we pardon
their sentences and you just let them out of jail a little earlier? Maybe you don't on some of them. Maybe just let them serve their time, and then others maybe you pardon. Maybe this and that. And I think it was reported that he just said, "F it, we're just going to pardon everybody. We're just going to rip it off like a Band-Aid and take the political heat for it." I don't know. Do I want to say? Do you want me to say? I'd probably just go on a rant, but I'll say a couple different things.
Sure.
I'm trying to be really quick. Number one, those prosecutions were immediately after the George Floyd riots, in which we saw, and after the 2016 inauguration riots, protesting Trump's election, and virtually nobody was prosecuted for billions of dollars of damages. There were some few select prosecutions, including one guy, I think he was prosecuted for murder because he burned down a building with somebody in it and he died. But other than some extreme examples, basically everybody just was able to do that and have no legal repercussions. So that's number one. Number two is the media and the Washington politicians lied about what it was. It was never an insurrection. They said it was an insurrection, but what the chants were stop the steal and count every vote and audit the election. Those are obviously pro-democracy, pro-republic sentiments. Now you can argue, well, they were wrong, and the election was, in fact, the most secure and accurate election in the history of the world. And so that's a different argument, though. That's just like, hey, you're stupid and you're wrong. But it was never an insurrection. It was follow the Constitution, count the votes. Yeah. And it was never an insurrection because all the people left their guns at home. And I don't think anybody's ever done a survey of all these people, but my guess is that like 80% of them had firearms they left at home. And if they would have brought their firearms to this as an insurrection, they would have been able to murder every last one of those Capitol Police officers and murder every last politician within that building, including Mike Pence and everybody else. Secret Service didn't have enough people, enough bullets, if those people were there for an insurrection. So that was a lot.
Especially since Nancy Pelosi refused the National Guard, right?
Correct. Yeah. Right. They were outgunned and would have been outgunned, but they're certainly undermanned. And then I'm not even going to whether or not there were agent provocateurs there. Who knows? We don't know that yet, or whether there are plants in there, or whether they caused the crowd to turn violent by throwing dozens of flashbang grenades within the crowd, actually hitting people. before they went off. I mean, they like threw them at their heads and stuff. It was right in the middle of the crowd, but without even talking about that, because there was a riot and that kind of stuff. So, so number one, there's this backdrop of lawlessness for similar protests by left-wing people that were not prosecuted. There were lies about the insurrection, and then the biggest thing I think for a lot of people is the lies that Capitol Police officers were killed. Mm-hmm. None of them were killed in this. Ashley Babbitt was murdered in cold blood. I've seen the video. 100%. This guy sprung from an office that he was concealing himself in a doorway, and he shot her in the head. Yeah, and killed her. And it was tremendously reckless. There were other Capitol officers just on the other side of her, mm-hmm. that if he wouldn't have, murdered her, that bullet probably would have sailed over their heads. But I mean, they were right behind her coming up the steps. Of course, he wasn't prosecuted. He was celebrated. And then they put Officer Sicknick famously in state as a hero, a person who was murdered at the riot, and he was not murdered at the riot. And all the politicians and the officials knew that he was not murdered at the riot that day. Before he was laid in state, they knew that. So they lied about all that, about murdering cops. There was another lady who was beaten to death, by the way, who was another protester. Oh, really? So there's protesters that lost their lives. I think one person had a stroke, another had a heart attack. Mm-hmm. They count them as people that were killed. Like if they say, well, there's 6 people that are killed in this insurrection. Yeah. They count Sicknick, of course, and he wasn't. Mm-hmm. Died of natural causes days after. I don't know if they count Ashley Babbitt in there, but there's another lady who was beat to death, literally like billy clubs in the tunnel. Anyway, so all that leads to the next issue, which is a poisoned jury. Mm-hmm. All these public officials were defaming all of the people that were there, whether they're guilty of offenses or not, saying this was an insurrection, a riot, and it was the biggest attack on our democracy since, what do they say? Like, they didn't even mention War of 1812, I don't think, but for 100 years. And so then every last one of these defendants requested a change of venue, which was not granted. If they wanted to have fair trials for these people, where you'd have a shot at sorting out through the judicial system who is really guilty and who is just there, because the crowd went in, and obviously we've seen videos of them just walking in and being led in. And of course they lied about that crazy guy that had the horns on his head. Yeah, the lectern guy. Yeah, no, well, the lectern guy's a different guy. That's right. Yes, Buffalo Head guy. Yeah, different guy. Yeah, Buffalo guy. You watch the entire video of him being led through that building and escorted, and they tried to open locked doors for him. He was 100% innocent. I mean, that guy, 100% innocent of anything. Yeah. And he was like the thing. But anyway, so there's no way to sort out those through the jury process if you poisoned the entire jury panel, which, of course, the voters in D.C. area voted, I think, 90+% for against Trump, for Biden. If they really wanted to have fair trials and wanted us as American people to rely upon it, they should have done a change of venue and said, okay, we're going to do all these trials in Indiana. All the defendants are from wherever. That it was not convenient. It's not a convenient forum for any defendant. Of course, they went there, and so you'd say, well, that they lose that objection. But really, the only additional inconvenience for trials in another state would be for the government. And who cares about the government's inconvenience? If it's the biggest insurrection, of ever, then pay the money to fly on these witnesses to Indiana or St. Louis or whatever, mm-hmm. where, the jurors would be like, well, wait a second, is this person guilty of it, or is the other person, and have an independent system. So, I mean, we add all that up, and then you look at all the biased judicial rulings, and even some of these judges that have sentenced people to crazy time are refusing to dismiss the cases that are still pending, because the next thing is they charge people with felonies that were not guilty of felonies, and the Supreme Court had to reverse all those convictions, hundreds and hundreds of convictions for a made-up felony that didn't exist. Everybody knew that it didn't exist. Left-wing and right-wing attorneys were saying that these 1512 violations had nothing to do with it. It's an Enron era statute that talked about destroying paperwork and evidence mm-hmm. In an investigation. They said, well, because they delayed an official proceeding, that was this felony. by their conduct. Oh, well, first of all, it delayed it like 2 hours. They still did the certification vote, I think, like 2 hours late.
Yeah.
So what was the real damage? But in any event, other than the property damage and assaulting a police officer. And so the reason why they did that is because even the assaulting of police, they basically decriminalized assaulting of police officers. Mm-hmm. And they make a big deal about it now. But, it's really hard in these liberal jurisdictions to get a felony conviction for assault of a law enforcement officer because they just don't care. Mm-hmm. They expect people to fight the police when they're being arrested. And so it's really hard to get jail time in a liberal jurisdiction on those kind of cases. So anyway, you combine all of that and the malicious prosecutions and the failure to the judges to give people fair trials.
Not to mention all the horrible media coverage and
that was the jury tampering issue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then the hearing, the January 6th committee that was just kind of making stuff up and didn't really do anything at all. Adding to that whole atmosphere.
Well, that's a big problem for that because not only because the federal government says, well, we can't publicly release all the videos because we have these ongoing prosecutions. However, they're letting all the witnesses who would be testifying in the trials and all the unfavorable evidence be put out in the public, which obviously poisoned the jury panels as well. You as a prosecutor, you can't publicize the evidence against the defendant and demonize them. And the president, everybody in the Department of Justice from the president on down, and he's the top official, defamed every one of the people that showed up for that protest as part of the insurrection. And so nobody got a fair trial. So all those people that are complaining about, oh, these pardons are terrible and it shows they don't respect law and order, or whatever they're complaining about today, it is false. Okay. And I don't care if your feelings are hurt by these pardons. Trump absolutely should have granted a pardon for every last one of them. They suffered a lot. They were held in solitary confinement, most of them. And then you talk about the Proud Boys. I can go off on a rant about them. That was a group that was created by Gavin McInnes as a drunken, almost like a adult frat. They would just get together and drink beers and tell stupid, inappropriate stories and jokes and stuff. And then they got the idea that part of their initiation process was, I think it was, anyway, so there was some history of them getting into fights with left-wing protesters, and that was seen as good. And they actually provided some security protection to Ann Coulter. Like when she was, when she was their early formation, she was getting protests at these college campuses, and they were pretty violent. And then the university police and local police weren't providing with her any protection. So a bunch of these semi-goons who are the Proud Boys provided her with protection. And there's a famous photo or video of, I think it might have been in Seattle or Portland, one of those, where there's like a street battle, and this guy swings swings like a bat at one of them, and they have like a slow-mo where he kind of dodges that, and he does like a right cross and just lays this guy out.
I think I've seen that video.
That's one of the Proud Boys
I didn't know
that they prosecuted as part of this conspiracy, and they got, I don't know how many years. They were sentenced, and none of them actually went to Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's crazy.
The Enrico Torrio or whatever, he was like the head guy. He was actually an FBI informant.
Really?
Trial. Yes.
Wow.
But he wasn't necessarily informing on that particular event. But he had a history of being maybe even a paid informant because they got him on some sort of drug charge. I mean, all these guys are informing on each other. And the prosecutions of all these people, I'm going way down the rabbit hole, were done by the guy in the FBI that was in charge of this entire 1,500 plus prosecution effort was the same guy that was in charge of the Whitmer Fednapping case. And that happened right before the election, if you remember, which I think was just election tampering. If you know anything about that, most of the people involved in that were either federal employees, meaning agents, or paid informants or confidential informants. The majority. It
was a group of like 5 guys who actually carried it out, right?
There's 5 guys that were prosecuted. There were more people involved, and most of them that were involved were feds, literally. And one guy was kind of like semi-retarded, and he was homeless, living in the basement of a vacuum store, like a store that sold vacuums. He didn't have a shower, and they didn't have any plan, so to speak. There was famously a hung jury on a couple of them, and others were found not guilty. I think a couple of them were finally found guilty. I'd have to double check on that, but it would have been the perfect textbook case of entrapment that ever existed. Yeah. And entrapment is where the government supplies the motive. Like, you would not have committed this crime except for the government came along and said,
unless the federal agents, were the ones.
They overcome almost your free will. It's really hard to get an entrapment defense. Anyway, so having said all that rant, I've gone on by a half hour. I apologize. You can edit that out if you want to.
I don't think it's quite a half hour.
But we're talking about legal issues, so I think it's somewhat relevant.
Yeah.
And I think when we look back on this in 10 years or 20 years, everybody's going to say, oh, my God, we didn't know it was so bad. Yeah. Well, they didn't know it was so bad because they didn't pay attention, and the media lied to them, and the government lied to them.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing for those January 6 people on the committee and the people that testified that Biden pardoned them, assuming that he actually pardoned them and it wasn't just somebody else that signed his name, which I think is probably like 80% true.
Yeah.
Which I think they ought to investigate whether or not he actually pardoned them.
Yeah.
Because I don't think he released any statement that he was going to pardon them. Have you seen anything before or after that supposed pardon where Biden says, oh, yeah, I wanted to pardon all those people?
Not that I know of.
I haven't seen anything. Not out of Biden's mouth. And nobody's asking him because I think somebody else signed his name electronically.
Yeah, probably.
Anyway. So
yes, well, that's a good rant. That's very topical. There's a lot of other legal issues we could talk about with tariffs and with deportations and birthright citizenship and stuff. Yes. In the first week, he's just almost carried out every single promise he made, like over the past 4 years. He's actually getting stuff done. It's great.
Well, and who was it? It was Mark Halperin. I watch his two-way broadcast or whatever you want to call it. He's got his own website and he's on YouTube, and he's an old Washington hand who got caught up in the Me Too stuff, but wasn't found to have done anything. But he lost his gig on MSNBC, and I don't know who he was writing for at the time, but he's the one that was the first to break the story that Biden was not going to run. Yeah, so he had that story like a week before everybody else. Anyway, but his whole thing is that Trump is in a unique situation because he served 4 years and then he lost, of course, or he didn't win re-election or didn't have her second term immediately. Let's put it that way. And so he's had 4 years out in the wilderness to think, okay, what did I do? What did I do wrong? And what do I need to do to fix all this stuff the right way? And how do we have everything ready to go and up and running when I come back in? And obviously they've done their homework. Yeah. Obviously they had a plan, and it really is impressive. And the executive orders are so much better than they were the first go around. Like famously, there was a couple of them that got overturned because they didn't vet them through the proper agencies and the people that would know, hey, you got to write this a little bit differently to make sure that you don't lose on these technical grounds. And so there are a lot, that birthright citizenship, if the Supreme Court takes it on its merits, they may just say, because I don't know that anybody has standing to actually challenge it. I mean, who is negatively affected by that executive order? Nobody yet. Yeah. Nobody has been denied citizenship or is claiming citizenship, and it's been said they don't have it. So I don't know how Trump didn't have standing to challenge all these election issues, back in 2020, but some attorney generals in the states have standing to challenge an executive order that has not actually had any effect on any individual person yet. I mean, who's the plaintiff? What's the controversy, and how does the court remedy whatever the wrong is? There's no wrong. Yeah. But I hope that the Supreme Court takes it, and I hope they rule on the merits. And these left wing, the trial judge who said, "Well, this is a ridiculous argument," and summarily dismissed it, stupidly, arrogantly. I think they're going to find out that the Supreme Court is going to rule in my opinion, is going to be kind of splitting the baby, which is if you're here legally, maybe even on a student visa, and you give birth, then that child is a citizen because they're born here and they're subject to our laws.
To the authority. Yeah.
But if you're here illegally, there's no way that's a citizen. And if it's a conspiracy to manipulate, if you can prove it's a conspiracy to manipulate the immigration laws, such as the tens of thousands of Chinese nationals who have come in here and have as pregnant women and stayed for a month on a tourist visa and given birth so that their kids can be dual citizens, I think all those should not be citizens of the United States, because it's obviously a conspiracy to defraud the United States with regard to the citizenship issue. And so I think on those issues, I think the Supreme Court's going to say no. The Trump is right.
Hopefully.
Because they have not actually been subject to the jurisdiction because they're here illegally. They have not been given any sort of legal permission. But who knows? That might require a couple Supreme Court judges to actually show a backbone and actually rule accurately on the Constitution. But anyway.
Let's turn to the book here with this first article where he actually mentions Missouri, but not in a positive way, unfortunately, because he's talking about this. He says the latest gambit in Missouri is providing judges with the costs of incarcerating the criminals they sentence. So law, I guess, at the time.
This came down when I was an assistant prosecutor in St. Louis County. It was a huge push. They had a sentencing advisory commission. It was well funded, and the Supreme Court was pushing hard. Because what they were trying to do, they were saying, well, our prisons are full, and there's a disparity in sentencing from outstate judges. That's what we call people that the counties that are not in the major metropolitan areas. They call them outstate Missouri. We're sentencing people to prison time where they wouldn't get the prison time in St. Louis City, Kansas City, and maybe somewhat less so in St. Louis County. And so they had all these advisory sentences, and they're absurd. Because they were written mostly by judges and academics who were more in favor of a St. Louis City attitude, and the whole purpose of it was to cut down incarcerations because it costs money and they only had so much bed space.
And that's what he mentions here. It's like you have to tell the judge, 5-year imprisonment would cost more than $50,000, but it'd be $9,000 cheaper for 5 years of intensive probation. So it's all these alternatives, and it's like, here's the cost, here's this. And the point he makes throughout this is such an excellent point is, okay, well, what about the cost to society? And if you don't actually incarcerate these people, you don't give them the punishment that they deserve. If you just put them through these sort of shabby rehabilitation programs or alternative, justice programs, whatever end result they have, and they're much more likely to go out and commit the crimes again in the future.
Well, for sure. If you don't incapacitate a repeat offender, then there's a cost associated with the likelihood of they're going to offend again. And they never build that in. And he's talking about just regular cost benefit analysis, but he doesn't, he maybe alludes to it, doesn't even talk about justice. Sometimes justice just demands, like a public park doesn't pay for itself. It's an expense. Okay. What's the benefit of having a playground, which those things can cost like a couple $100,000 easy. What's the benefit of that? If you do a cost benefit analysis, there is no cost savings for that. There's no money that you're going to save or you're going to generate from that. It's all speculative, but families enjoy it, and it's a good thing to have. And people, it's perfectly appropriate to spend money on it.
Because he doesn't mention that.
It's appropriate to spend money on a prison, to put people in jail, to punish them. But these sentencing advisory people, and back in the day when this came through, it was a big push. Supreme Court was saying you should follow these, but then there was no authority for them to mandate it, and so all the judges, and especially my then boss Bob McCullough, said, you don't even cite that. You're not even going to mention that because that advisory commission has less influence and less legal authority to make a sentencing recommendation than our office does, and you're going to still do what we think is right and appropriate under the circumstances. And if they need more bed space, the legislature should appropriate more money for more prisons.
Yeah, because he does kind of mention that a little bit. He says, in all these calculations, we're leaving out the costs of violence, intimidation, the fears that people have for the safety of themselves and their children, not to mention the sense of helplessness and outrage when the society refuses to pay as much attention to innocent victims as they lavish on the criminals who victimize them. I think that's not something that's quantifiable in monetary terms, like just the direct impact on society and helplessness and things like that, which will go up if you're not adequately punishing the people who commit crimes. How do you tell that to a judge and compare that to the costs of just a room in prison for 5 years?
Yeah, I looked up one of my favorite defendants in the sense that I got a ton of time on this guy and he deserved every minute of it. I've been out of that office in February. It'll be 18 years, right? I think 17, 18 years. It's 2007. So what is that? 18?
Yeah, 18.
Okay.
Yes.
So he's still in prison. Mm-hmm. And he's in prison on a 30-year sentence for what's called a stealing third offense. So a stealing third offense was if you commit your third offense, no matter what the value is, it's a felony. Mm-hmm. And because he was a prior and persistent offender, the maximum got bumped up to essentially an A felony, so it's 30 years. I just checked this morning, and he's still in prison. He also had concurrent terms, and Sowell mentions, concurrent terms, and basically you get a gimme on those. Yeah. But he had concurrent terms for a number of burglaries and stealings and that kind of stuff. And people say, well, I mean, that's a lot of time. If you look at it on paper for that one offense, we didn't allege the amount of money, but he got hammered in part because he was, I called him, I didn't say this in front of the jury, but I called him the Terminator of thieves. He just would never stop. He would be, even as a juvenile, he would be incarcerated as soon as he'd get out. Yeah. He was stealing and stealing and stealing. Wow. And the most recent one that really kind of came across my radar was his next door neighbor was, when he got on parole again, was an elderly woman, and her husband her son, that she was like in one of those neighborhoods where she was like the last old lady to remain in the community, as the rest of the neighborhood's getting bombed out by arson and whatever. Wow. It was a tough neighborhood, but she lived there all her life. I think she might have even been born there. One of those type of things where like they actually gave birth in the living room. Yeah. Anyway, she had a health issue. Her son came over there. She had health issues, so the ambulance came by and picked her up. The son follows her to the hospital. That night, the son goes back to get her some clothes, and this neighbor across the street had not only saw them leave, and so he burglarized their house. Wow. And didn't just steal a bunch of her stuff. She didn't have much. So didn't just steal a bunch of her stuff, but like dumped the trash can in the kitchen all over the kitchen and the floor, and left food out. I mean, he just trashed their place.
Terrible.
And so I was like, you know what? It's one thing if you got a drug problem, you go in there, you steal something valuable because you're upon it, you get a problem or whatever. This guy was just a horse, what? And he did it to the wrong innocent victim who was so vulnerable. And I remember talking to her son, he's like, it's just so maddening, that we, with all the crime in the neighborhood, and she's already had her car broken into and all that kind of stuff. But to do this when she's going to the hospital, and then just to dump the trash. The biggest thing was dumping the trash in the kitchen floor. And so, he had a number of cases, but he got 30 years. Wow. And he's been in prison this entire time. And the only regret is he didn't get more. Because he would have just never stopped. Yeah, and it's money well spent to keep this guy in jail.
Yeah, that's true.
In any event.
Yes, the next article here, this is a really depressing story. Little Angelo. He says, little Angelo Marinda lived only 8 months, and it took more than twice that long to convict his father of his murder. I said that the problem started as this horrible situation where Angelo had 12 days after he was born, he turned up at a hospital with broken bones. So something happened when he was very young, and then later on...
Wait, and let me interrupt here. Sorry, I'm going on all these rants.
That's all right.
I didn't know this before I became a prosecutor. It is really hard to break bones of a small child.
Really?
You say, well, why is they so small? They're bendy. Their bones are like rubber. they're like cartilage. It's really hard to break the bones of an infant. That means you really had to put a lot of effort into it. Anyway, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. But then, he brings up there's this, family reunification services. And so it's like you put the parents through, therapy or whatever, and you reunite them with their child 'cause it's thought to be, a better situation if they've done some horrible crime, like that clearly happened to this little baby. And then, of course, his father ended up killing him later on after he was reunited with him, before he even turned 8 months old or when he was 8 months old. Yeah. And so this was, he says social workers thought it would be nice if little Angelo could have a 2-day unsupervised visit with his parents at Christmas. It was a visit from which he would not return alive. And then he says, for more than 16 months after the baby's death, Angelo's father has been convicted of having literally shaken him to death. And so it's this horrible, misguided approach to things. It's just like, well, it'll just be so much better if we just didn't separate the family. We've just left this baby with the father. Eventually he'll get better. He'll get over whatever, issues he's having. But clearly not. Sometimes it is far, far better just to remove a child from a bad situation. The foster care system and adoption isn't perfect, but it's so much better than situations like this.
Yeah, and I think he gives to give a little bit more details that he had an older child that was already taken away from him.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that should be considered. That if you have your parental rights terminated, you want to have your parental rights terminated as to any that child or any future child, unless you can get some sort of judicial determination that you are an appropriate parent. But these are really hard cases. I mean, this, of course, they're so depressing. You tend to see these were really pretty common back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. There have been a lot of reforms. Yeah. The real challenge of them is you want these children removed from dangerous situations, but the challenge is government overreach and taking children out where it's a close call, or they just don't like the parenting style, or there's discipline, because Missouri corporal discipline is still legal. I mean, you can get a switch, like a little stick out in the backyard and beat your kid with it, but you can't torture them. You can't do it. You have to be able to you have to do it for punishment as opposed to pleasure, like you really enjoy beating the hell out of a child. So these are tougher than a lot of people give it credit for. But in this example, obviously, it was a complete screw up, and it's just a devaluation of children as opposed to, oh yeah, let's do a 2-day unsupervised visit over Christmas. Yeah. I mean, that's just insane.
He makes another great point that so much of the trial was based on the analysis of experts, talking about, well, it's it's just so much better for the children, to have these circumstances and this will work and things like that. But it's like these experts have never met the parents, have never met the child. They're not immediately involved, so they're experts in sort of like a mile high sense where they might know across different categories what might happen, but they're not really perfectly suited to determine what the best case is for this horrible father here who killed his son.
Yeah, and it supports his theory that the more of an so-called expert you are, the less common sense or connection to reality you really have. Yeah.
Which
kind of leads into the next article, which is "Love Those Killers" is the title, and this is really the bane of the criminal justice system, are the people and the media. That trumpet, the positive attributes of killers, and they aren't balanced. He talks. This is a really famous case. Andrea Yates. And I looked this up just to see if she was still alive. She is. She's still in custody. I think as he's writing this, she had been convicted, or maybe she's just going to trial. Yeah. But she killed 5 of her kids, and I purposely didn't reread the facts of it, because if I remember correctly, I think she drowned 2 of them in a bathtub, like one after the other. I mean, it was really, really bad. And so there were people that kind of rushed to her defense. And anyway, she got the trial reversed on appeal, and then she was tried again, and she was found guilty by reason of mental illness, which in Texas means you're going to the Department of Mental Health. And so she is still in their custody or their care. I don't know how secure she is at this point, so many years later. But yeah, it's. I mean, it was a horrific crime, and of course he's talking about how Rosie O'Donnell is saying how, any kind of implying any one of us could have, had this mental break or whatever. Of course, she's insane. I don't think at the time we didn't realize how crazy Rosie O'Donnell was. Now, obviously, we see her. Any of her recent videos,
because he mentioned the quote is, "I felt such overwhelming empathy for her of what it must have been like for her to do that. When you've been on the edge, you can understand what it's like to go over." Like, it's crazy. No, she killed 5 of her children. You can't empathize with that too much. But he points this out, 'cause it's like every once in a while, the media or certain people will just latch on to a certain case and like, okay, well, it's just a feint. It wasn't their fault. In this case, he mentions, it was the claim was made that she suffered from postpartum depression, and it was either that or the drugs she had to take caused her to kill her children. And so it's like always like, well, it wasn't really her fault. It could have happened to any one of us. Things like that, where it's like it becomes sort of a champion for a different issue, and you sort of ignore the facts of the case entirely. Like, no, that's still a horrible, horrible action. No matter what might have caused her to do it, and you can't just automatically say, well, she's fine. She's innocent of it.
Yeah, and when you look at the facts of the case, it was so deliberate, and over a period of time, they were all killed, I believe, on the same day. But there were 5 young children, and I forget I don't even want to remember the details of it, because when you know the details of it, you're even more offended that anybody would. That's a necessary thing for a judge and a jury to consider. Because if the more realistic, not guilty by reason of insanity is somebody who stabs somebody and kills them, but literally thinks they're carving a pumpkin, or they think they're killing Satan or whatever, and they literally do, and they have a history of psychological problems. But the problem that Andrea Yates had was she knew what she was doing. Yeah. She said, I was killing my kids, and now the question is, can that postpartum depression? It's not really a psychosis where she didn't know what she was doing. She just did it. And so the question is, can anybody do that and not be insane? Yeah. And that bleeds into the evil issue. But the better example is the second one. He talks about these juveniles that murdered a little kid, enticed her away from a mall in England. And then England's crazy. And they were crazy then. They're even more crazy now. Their criminal justice system and how they bend over backwards and spend tons of money for the benefit of criminals. Just weird. But that family was the family of these released juveniles after they committed the murder, or paid all this money and changed their identity so they weren't held back. Yeah. Now, I get the juvenile system, like even in Missouri, is technically set up not to punish children. It's different. It's not it's not the criminal justice system. It's a juvenile justice system, but the purpose is treatment and reformation. And it's different because they're children. But there's a system in Missouri to certify children as adults, and then they get dumped in the adult system. Dumped in meaning their courts are adjudicated as if they're adults, and they're going to be punished. Now, they aren't going to be dumped into an adult prison, but they will be held securely until they hit a certain age, and then they're going to the adult prison. Yeah. But the same reasoning, there's a famous Supreme Court case that originated out of Jefferson County, Missouri, where a 17-year-old in a trailer park beat a woman, that tied her up, put her in a sack, and dropped her off into the Mississippi when she was still alive. And she died, of course. And the Supreme Court said you can't have the death penalty for anybody under 18 because they don't really know or appreciate the wrongfulness of their conduct. Well, this guy actually confessed and said, well, I'm 17. You can't charge me with murder. Mm-hmm. And that's part of his calculation in killing her.
Yeah. That's great.
And wait a second. And so even knowing that, the Supreme Court said, well, he didn't really appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct in order to be sentenced to death. But of course, that was commuted. I assume he's still in prison somewhere. But
wow. But it's a similar sort of thing with the media outrage with this next article he has. This is called Law on Trial. Yes. And he describes this circumstance, the Amadou Diallo.
Amadou Diallo. It's a huge case at the time. Big circus surrounding it. Real tragedy. And the facts that came out of trial, I think all the officers were acquitted. Mm-hmm. But the facts came out that this guy's hanging out in front of this building where there's a serial rapist on the loose. He was not the serial rapist. Yeah. but they had a undercover patrolman patrolling out there because somebody was grabbing women and raping them in this neighborhood. And this guy's out at 12:30 at night. I think he got some takeout food, just standing outside.
I know, yeah, Sowell describes you standing in a doorway, just periodically looking up and down both ways across the street. He says somebody reported it to the police earlier, and then later when 4 cops pulled up, who were on patrol, when they got out, he ran inside, and then in the hallway, this dark hallway of this building, he turned and pulled something out of his pocket. One of the officers yelled gun, and then at the same time, a different officer fell backwards, like off the steps. He just lost his balance, but then the other officers thought that he had been shot, and so they fired back at Diallo, who was killed. And he describes it as like a tragedy of errors here. Yes. But of course, it was described as this big racially motivated thing because the cops were white and Diallo was black. And so clearly it was just, racism and, he did nothing wrong here. And therefore the whole criminal justice system is racist, which we've heard even more of those sorts of events since, which are usually not tied to race at all, but just, the circumstances that happen to unfold.
Yeah, well, even before the Michael Brown shooting, where he attacked Darren Wilson, even before that, when there was ever saw a media headline, officer involved shooting, I said a little prayer that the officer was black, because if the officer was black, doesn't matter the race of the suspect or if they're shot at or killed, there was never any protests. Didn't matter. But if there was a white person, a white officer involved, and then the second prayer is, I hope if he killed somebody, I hope the victim was white, so-called victim or whatever, the shootee or the decedent, because it just changes everything as far as the public protests. We saw a number of protests at our office when I was in there, and there was always a small number of activists. And they always arrange ahead of time to be arrested. I'm putting in air quotes, arrested. So they were just kind of processed in one door and out the other. And so they always had an arrangement that they would be not inconvenienced. So they have a small number of protesters. They have a double that number of police officers. And they have about the same double number of media. And I remember there was one, they threw some like red... maybe it's tomato sauce on the building as if it were blood. And I remember them saying, okay, all right, everybody come into the building. But before you come in, we're all going to get arrested. Okay? And they had a bullhorn. We're all going to get arrested. They're going to process you in. You're not actually going to go to jail cell, but we're all going to get arrested. And they're going to give you paperwork, and then you're going to leave. But if you have any drugs on you, do not go in to be arrested. They will keep you if you have drugs on you. If you have any weapons, do not go in to be arrested because they will keep you if you have weapons, because you're going into a jail facility and you can't bring drugs or weapons. Now, the third thing is if you have other warrants out for your arrest, do not go inside to be arrested. They will keep you. And they split. They literally split. And I remember standing next to one of the officers as we were watching up on the balconies of this circus. Yeah. I was like, one of the supervisors, I think, or maybe it was from a neighboring municipality. We all just kind of like were watching the show. I said, shouldn't you round up that group that's leaving? Isn't that probable cause? But they didn't. They had an arrangement.
That's
funny. Went in and like a little parade. They just like waved them through the metal detectors. Come on, come here. Give us your name, and then out they went.
That's funny.
It's just a big circus for performative, and of course that speech was not broadcast on the evening news. Don't you think that the people would have been like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that they gave those instructions to those people"? But no, they had 2 people throwing blood on the building, and they had the spokesperson say, "Oh, it was this terrible shooting of an innocent black person," and then showed people getting like taken into custody, so to speak, like AOC with like putting her hands behind her back as if she's dead. It's the exact same thing. It hasn't changed at all in all these years. So it's really wild.
Yeah. The next article is then about abortion. This is an issue we've talked about a lot, but this is essentially just talking about, I know we've mentioned this a bunch, but, how there's never any actual informed consent given in abortions. You use all this clouded language, you change sort of how people view things, and you don't actually tell people what happens, especially in those late-term abortions where you're actually, dismembering, the baby while it's still in the womb. And it's like, do you really have informed consent in those cases? And of course, Sowell's arguing, no, you're not actually telling people what's happening. You're clouding everything that actually goes on. You're putting it in flowery language, and that even for just if you just consider it a medical operation, then that just doesn't meet the standard for informed consent. There's no way we can keep this going on.
Yeah, and it's difficult because I got to tell you, I don't want to be reminded, kind of like I didn't want to be reminded of the Andrea Yates case. Yeah. I don't want to be reminded of what these people are doing. And I remember I talked to a pro-life activist at a group discussion a couple months ago. And I said, I just, it would be a good idea, it would be an effective idea for us to communicate that stuff. Even at church, because you never hear any of the details, in the Catholic Church, which is notoriously pro-life. But God, it's just so horrible. Yeah. It's like, but then I'm like, well, I guess that's how the Germans were able to live near the Nazi concentration camps. You just don't want to know, you just don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
But he makes a great point, that the Supreme Court rushed in and made a decision at the time. He's writing this, of course, before the Dobbs decision, not knowing that eventually, Donald Trump, of all people, who at the time that Sowell was writing this, Donald Trump was certainly pro-choice.
Oh, yeah.
He was pro-choice up until 5 minutes before he got elected, I think, the first time. So, and then, they basically just pulled it out of the state control because the states were of differing opinions on the issue, which now that's where we're at now. So
he doesn't mention Casey in here. I wonder if this was written before then too, with the further sort of pulling out of nothing for the right to abortion.
It might have been, but it for his purposes, it wasn't necessary to talk about the subsequent decisions. Because Roe v. Wade was 73, and he's writing this early aughts, so there would have been. I can't remember the dates of those decisions. There would have been some decisions after Roe that modified it. Certainly by the time he wrote this, it might have been Casey, but he's basically saying, well, this is how it got pulled out of the public domain, and now it's just this right that's just created out of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Which is like the opposite of what they're doing with the next topic, which is gun control myths, which is it's actually in the Constitution. There's a long history of it. Yeah. I'm like, well, that's not what it means. Mm-hmm. And I love his analysis because he talks about the statistics between London and the murder rate in London and the murder rate in New York. And experts were always trying to find an example, and they still do this, example of what's the difference between this jurisdiction and that jurisdiction. Well, if you allow guns, then you're going to have more violent crime. But they're always searching for some way to explain that. But now London, of course, now I don't know what the violent crime statistics now are, but then maybe it's always easy. It's easy to have your less murders in their statistics or assaults or robberies if you don't report them as robberies and assaults. Mm-hmm. So you can game the system, which is I think what a lot has happened since the George Floyd, because people just weren't getting arrested.
Yeah. Yeah, he mentions, a lot of great points. He says in 1954, there were only a dozen armed robberies in London, but by the 1990s, there were more than 100 times as many. In England, as in the United States, drastic crackdowns on gun ownership by law-abiding citizens were accompanied by ever greater leniency to criminals. In both countries, this turned out to be a formula for disaster. It's like even just looking over length of time in the same place, as you increase, gun control laws, it's not going to just bring down violent crime automatically. It's just not how that works. And that ties into the next one, it's gun control myths part 2 for the last article we're talking about. This is just about just rates of gun ownership, and of course they try to make the argument that the more guns you have, the more people are killed by guns, and therefore we have to eliminate all guns. And he says within the United States, rural areas have higher rates of gun ownership and lower rates of murder. Whites have higher rates of gun ownership than blacks and much lower murder rates. For the country as a whole, handgun ownership doubled in the late 20th century while the murder rate went down. So it's like clearly just just owning a gun does not make you more likely to kill someone. And I really like. Let me see if I can find the quote he had in here. He said
about the bathtubs.
Yeah, that too.
I'll say that while you're looking. So, some small children do in fact get accidentally killed by guns in the home, but fewer than drown in bathtubs. Is anyone for banning bathtubs? Yeah. No, it's a correlation versus causation.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what your quote was you're looking for.
Yeah, I was looking at this one because he says, because talking about just the rates of victims of gun violence or whatever term they want to use. He says people killed at home by family members are highly atypical, because I like to make the argument if you have a gun at home, it's inherently more dangerous and things like that. He says the great majority of these victims have had to call the police to their homes before because of domestic violence, and just over half have had the cops out several times. These are not just ordinary people who happen to lose their temper when a gun was at hand. Yeah. And that's the key point in a lot of these arguments is they're like, well, if you have a gun, you're just more likely to kill. Well, that not necessarily. Just because a gun is present does not mean I'm going to pick it up and shoot somebody with it just because it's there. Gun violence in the home is there's a lot of different factors going on with that, and it's like that. I think that's what ties into a lot of people on the left are just inherently afraid of guns entirely. Like if you mention to someone who's pro gun restrictions and stuff like that, oh, you have a gun? Yeah. You're allowed. They're like scared by it. It's like amazing to them that anyone would even dare to do that thing, because they view the object itself as just just the worst thing that someone could possibly possess and will inherently lead to you killing someone.
Yeah, it's funny because when my family didn't hunt, we didn't have guns in the home as a kid, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I ever even fired a weapon. Yeah. In fact, it wasn't until I was a prosecutor, and I'd been a prosecutor for a couple of years before I fired one. So I knew the science and all that, and trigger pull, and how difficult it was to have accidental discharge. But once you fire them, once you use them, you realize, oh, well, it's scary at first. You're a little nervous with it because you think, oh my gosh, this can shoot somebody and kill them. But after you use them, you're like, oh, okay, just got to make sure I don't point it at somebody and pull the trigger. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of people, and it's always fun if you ever watch those videos. Occasionally, a liberal reporter will go to a gun range. Mm-hmm. And it's great when it's a lady, because they're like, "This is great," because it empowers people, especially the women. I don't understand why African American politicians or people are. There's a lot of them that are pro Second Amendment, because they, if you live in a bad neighborhood, you definitely want to have a firearm
for sure
to protect yourself and your family. But you'd think that more women, because there's a lot of women that are anti-gun. But if I were a lady, I would absolutely have a gun in my purse. Because outside of prison, men are unlikely to get raped, right? Yeah. But women can be sexually assaulted, and that's could be very random, And I would think that every feminist would be super pro Second Amendment. It doesn't make any sense that there's not 100% overlap between feminists and pro, like the NRA. NRA should have a huge feminist division, feminist NRA members, because it empowers women. Mm-hmm. It equalizes it. If you're a 100-pound woman and some 200-pound guy attacks you, you're in deep trouble. Yeah. Unless you have a gun, the gun can equalize it.
Yeah, for sure.
If you can get to it and fire it and all that stuff. Then
very true. All right. Well, do you have any other final thoughts? That brings us to the end of the articles we were going to talk about. It's a very rant-heavy.
Talked enough. What are your thoughts?
No, I mean, all these. Another good chapter here. Very sort of case specific with a lot of these, but always good to sort of bring those out to the bigger picture, which he does pretty well. Yeah,
and I remember the Andrea Yates case. Being in the media, it was all over the media. It's one of those. It's like today it would be like a viral thing. Like this is probably really pre-internet, pre-social media. Yeah. And Amadou Diallo, that was a thing in New York, which was Al Sharpton. It'd be a big New York, DC media thing. Out here it's just like, well, that's weird. Yeah. But it's a big deal for them. So it's kind of interesting to read them so many years later.
For sure. To see how many similar events are still happening or still blown up into these fake controversies, really.
Well, I think, the funny thing is with these body cam videos, they're really we're really cutting down on the hysteria, I think, and it's, and of course people have unrealistic expectations how quickly you can, disarm somebody or, making these decisions. But so many of them, it's like, oh gosh, I had to slow down the video to see that guy pull out the gun.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you've seen it. Maybe we've talked about it on the podcast, but it was I think a fairly recent one where a cop shot a woman who he was like an apartment call or something. And with like a split second, she has a knife and slashes him across the face and runs down the hallway at him. And it's like if that if you didn't have that body cam footage, I guarantee that would have been another case exactly like that. No matter what the cop would have said, but you can clearly see just how dangerous that situation was because she was coming right at him. And so stuff like that is very helpful in these things.
And let me go back to my original rant in this episode.
Sure.
Another reason why all those people should be pardoned is because they didn't release the body cam videos. There's hundreds and hundreds of hours of body cam videos. That's our capital.
Yeah.
All those, especially the body cams that are outside the building, and some of them where the officer's saying, "What the hell are we doing out here throwing flashbang grenades at the crowd? We need more people up here. They're screwing us.
Yeah.
This is out of control. Where's the backup?" But they held on to those videos as long as they possibly could until Tucker Carlson released. The Speaker of the House gave him access to it, and that was right before Tucker got fired.
Yeah,
like within a month for sure, if not 2 weeks.
Wow.
His producer had access to it, and Tucker's never really said why he got fired, but I assume it was because of that. He had access to it, and he broadcast that the Buffalo Head guy just being led through the building, and I think it was a week later he got fired.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that was the order of events there. It's interesting.
Oh yeah, right away. Look at the calendar of events. It's right after it.
Wow, interesting. All right, well, we should probably wind down the episode here. This has been Season 10, Episode 9 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop. I have another 3 hours of comments I want to make about January 6 pardons.
I'm sure you could.
So just keep recording.
Yeah.